The first time she laughed at my shaking hands, I thought she was joking. The fifth time, I knew she meant it. My wife, Elaine, stood by the dining table, smiling at our neighbors. "Harold still uses a scale to measure sugar," she said. "He doesn't trust his own hands." They laughed. I forced a small smile, but inside, something broke. That night, after everyone left, I went to the kitchen to wash a glass. Elaine was on the phone, speaking quietly. She didn't know I was there. "Yeah," she said, "I'll sign it myself. He won't even notice. His hands shake too much to read the papers anyway." Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. I froze. She was talking about my mother's cottage, the one on Tybee Island. My mother left it to me after she passed away. It wasn't just a house. It was her memory. Every corner of that place smelled like her lemon candles and ocean air. I told Elaine many times that it wasn't for sale. She'd said, "You're living in the past, Harold. The dead don't pay bills." That night, her phone call told me everything. She wanted to sell it anyway, and forge my signature to do it. When she saw me standing there, she hung up quickly and tried to smile. "You scared me," she said. "I didn't mean to," I replied. "What are you doing up?" "Just checking the doors." She brushed past me and went to bed. I sat alone at the table, staring at my hands. Yes, they shook sometimes, but not because I was weak. It was the medication. Nothing more. I opened the drawer where I kept the cottage papers. The original deed was still there, unsigned. But beside it was a photocopy. My name already written at the bottom, in shaky ink that looked almost like mine. Almost. I placed the paper flat on the table and stared at it until sunrise. The next morning, she acted normal, humming while she made coffee, scrolling on her phone. But I wasn't the same man anymore. She thought I was old, tired, and slow. She forgot I used to be a pharmacist, and I knew better than anyone that sometimes the smallest thing in a cup can change everything. So that morning, while she drank her coffee, I smiled and said softly to myself, "You just wrote your own prescription, Elaine." The next few days were heavy. I woke up before sunrise every morning, staring at the ceiling, listening to Elaine's voice in my head. "He won't even notice. His hands shake too much to read the papers." I tried to focus on normal things. I made breakfast, watered the plants, fed the cat. But nothing felt normal anymore. Every word she had said replayed again and again. She wasn't just cruel. She was planning to steal something that wasn't hers. One evening, while I was folding laundry, she walked in and tossed a stack of mail on the table. "You've got hospital bills again," she said. "Maybe it's time to sell that old cottage and stop pretending it means something." I looked at her, calm but cold. "You mean my mother's house?" She smirked. "Yes, Harold. Your mother's ghost house." I didn't reply. Instead, I went to my study and shut the door. My hands were shaking again, but not from fear this time. From anger. I sat there for hours, staring at the deed. When you spend years being spoken to like a burden, you start believing it. I had begun to think maybe I was useless. But that night, something inside me shifted. I reached for my old leather bag, the one I used when I worked as a pharmacist. Inside was my expired medical license and a few small glass vials, long since emptied. I held one up to the light. It felt strange, remembering how much control knowledge once gave me. I hadn't used that power in years. The next morning, I visited my doctor for a regular checkup. He told me my blood pressure was high again. "You need less stress, Harold," he said. I smiled faintly. "I'm working on it." On the way back, I stopped by the river and sat on a bench. I thought about Ellen, my first wife. She used to say, "Use your mind before your mouth. Smart silence lasts longer than loud anger." That line hit me hard, because I realized I had been quiet for too long. Not the smart kind of silence, but the scared kind. That night, I made a plan. Not to hurt Elaine. No, that would make me just like her. My plan was to teach her what truth tastes like. After dinner, she poured herself wine and turned on the TV. I sat beside her, pretending to be half asleep. "You should rest more," she said, pretending to sound caring. "Your health won't survive another stroke." I opened my eyes and smiled weakly. You might be right. She didn't notice the calm in my voice. When she went to bed, I opened my notebook and began writing. Each page had a heading: money, documents, behavior, witnesses. I started tracking her actions like a case study. Every phone call, every receipt, every insult. By midnight, my notebook had 5 pages filled. The last line I wrote was, "March 3rd, she will pour coffee at 8:15 a.m. as usual." That's when I start. Then I picked up the phone and called an old friend, Dr. Alvarez, a retired colleague. "Luis," I said softly, "do you still have those lab test powders we used for glucose checks?" He laughed. "You mean the harmless stuff for blood sugar tests?" "Sure, why?" "I just need a little," I said. "Call it a science project." He didn't ask questions. When I hung up, I felt strangely calm. For the first time in months, I had control again, not over her, but over myself. The next morning, she looked at me across the breakfast table and said, "You're quiet these days. Planning something?" I smiled. "Just learning how to measure sugar again." She rolled her eyes and left the room. I watched her go, the morning light catching the steam rising from her coffee cup. And for the first time, I didn't shake. A few days later, I went to see Dr. Alvarez at his small lab on River Street. The same man who once worked beside me in the pharmacy still had the same slow, kind smile. He poured us both coffee and said, "So what kind of experiment needs glucose powder?" I smiled. "An experiment in patience." He laughed, not knowing how serious I was. I told him I just needed a harmless amount, the kind that could make someone sweat or shake a little if they had too much sugar in their blood. He handed me a small brown glass jar. On the label, it said, "Glucose Tolerance Test Sample, Non-Toxic." "No danger, right?" he asked. "None at all," I said. "Just truth in disguise." That evening I went home and sat at my kitchen table, staring at the jar. The house was quiet. Elaine was out for her usual dinner with her book club, though I knew she was meeting her friend Rita. The same, one who helped her find buyers for the cottage. Placed the jar next to my coffee cup and began testing tiny spoonfuls in water. It dissolved fast and left no taste. I wrote the reaction time in my notebook. My old pharmacist's habit kicked in. Measure, record, test again. Then I looked around the kitchen. On the shelf above the coffee maker sat our new smart camera, a birthday gift from Sophie, my daughter. I'd never used it much. That night I did. I connected it to my phone and angled it toward the kitchen table. From there, it could see the coffee pot, sugar jar, and both cups. The plan wasn't just to add powder. The real plan was to catch her truth. Over the next few days, I pretended to forget what had happened. I asked Elaine if she needed help with the open house paperwork. She smirked. "You wouldn't understand half of it anyway, Harold," I smiled back. "You're probably right, but I can make good coffee." Her eyes rolled, but she nodded. "Fine. Just don't burn it." That was all I needed. Her trust in my weakness. The following night, she left her laptop open on the counter. I glanced at the screen and saw an email. "Offer for Tybee property approved. Need seller signature within 72 hours. The date at the top read March 2nd. She was planning to sign it the next morning. At 6 a.m., I woke before her. I measured 1 level teaspoon of the glucose powder and mixed it into her cup. Then I turned on the smart camera, adjusted my tie, and waited. She came downstairs humming, phone in one hand. "Morning," she said. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep," I replied. "You make coffee?" "Yes. Yours is fresh." She sat down, took her first sip, and smiled. Not bad, old man." I just nodded. "How's the sale going?" "Almost done," she said proudly. "By tonight, that old cottage will be someone else's problem. I looked at my watch. 3 minutes had passed since her first sip. By the 4th minute, she touched her forehead. "Why is it so hot in here?" "It's 68 degrees," I said calmly. Her hand trembled slightly. "I feel dizzy." I poured her a glass of water. "Maybe your body's reacting to stress," I said. "Or guilt," she blinked. "What did you say?" I looked her straight in the eye. "You should sit down, Elaine. I wouldn't want you fainting before the guests arrive tomorrow." She froze, confused. "Guests?" "Yes," I said, smiling. "I thought we could host brunch. You can show everyone how strong you are." Her face went pale. She didn't know I had just recorded her saying everything about the sale, the forgery, all of it. When she went upstairs to rest, I checked the footage. Her words were clear, her tone careless. I saved it under a simple name, Coffee. March 3rd. Tomorrow would be the real test. And for once, she'd be the one shaking. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room with the lamp on low, notebook open, planning every minute of the next morning. Elaine liked everything perfect. Her clothes pressed, her makeup flawless, her coffee exactly at 8:15. I knew her routine better than she knew mine. At sunrise, I walked into the kitchen and checked the smart camera feed. The recording from yesterday was there. Her voice clear as day, saying, "By tonight, that old cottage will be someone else's problem." I saved a copy on my phone and one on a flash drive. Then I cleaned the kitchen, every corner, every cup, not because I needed to, but because control felt good again. When she came down around 7, she looked at me suspiciously. "You're up early again," she said. "I guess I'm trying to build new habits," I replied, stirring sugar into my own cup. She poured herself coffee and sat at the table. "You've been quiet lately," she said. "It's strange. Usually you complain about my spending." "I've been thinking," I said softly. "You might be right about the cottage." She raised an eyebrow. "Oh, finally coming to your senses? Maybe. We could even celebrate." Her smile returned, thin but greedy. "A brunch, maybe? Invite the neighbors? I can handle the menu if you don't mess with the coffee." I smiled. "I'll leave that part to you." Inside, I was already one step ahead. After she left for the market, I made a checklist in my notebook. Camera recording ready. Flash drive backup. Powder labeled vitamin mix. Invite sent to 3 neighbors and Sophie. Yes, I'd called Sophie that morning. She didn't know all the details, but she knew enough. "Dad," she said, "just don't do anything that'll get you in trouble." "Trust me," I told her. "This isn't that kind of plan." By noon, Elaine returned with groceries, humming as she unpacked. She had no idea that the jar labeled vitamin mix wasn't vitamins at all, just glucose powder. I placed it next to the sugar bowl, right where she'd see it tomorrow morning. That evening, she sat at the kitchen table signing papers. Her hand moved confidently across the page. She'd practiced my shaky signature well. I stood behind her for a moment, watching the loop of the H in Harold. It wasn't perfect. It was arrogant. "Want some coffee?" I asked casually. "No, thanks. I've had enough of your science projects." She laughed, proud of her joke. I smiled, pouring myself a small cup. "You'll want some tomorrow," I said. "Why?" she asked. "Because you'll need energy for the guests." "Guests?" She looked up, frowning. "Brunch," I said. "You mentioned it, remember? I already invited a few people." Her face stiffened. "You what?" "I thought it'd be nice to show everyone the new listing." She hesitated, then forced a laugh. "You're impossible, but fine. Maybe it's good to show the place off." I nodded, hiding my grin behind the coffee cup. After she went to bed, I double-checked everything. The video, the flash drive, the phone recording. I even placed an envelope with copies of the deed and bank emails in my coat pocket, just in case. Before turning in, I stood by the kitchen window, and looked out toward the quiet street. The air smelled like rain and wet pine. Tomorrow morning she'd walk into this kitchen thinking she was the clever one, the woman who could outsmart her aging husband. And I'd hand her the same cup she'd mocked me for shaking to pour. But this time, I wouldn't be shaking. This time, she would. Sunday morning came quietly. The kind of still morning that feels like it's waiting for something. I woke before the alarm, washed my face, and stood by the window for a long time. The street was empty except for a few joggers and the sound of a dog barking somewhere down the block. The house smelled like polish and flowers. Elaine had been up late cleaning, setting the table, and arranging plates for her brunch. She wanted everything perfect. She wanted people to see her as the smart, successful woman who ran this house. I smiled at the thought. At 8 o'clock, she walked into the kitchen in a silk dress, hair curled, perfume strong enough to cover the scent of fresh coffee. "Big day," she said proudly. "Sure is," I replied, checking my watch. I had already set up the camera in the same corner as before. The light on it blinked green. I had my phone ready in my pocket, with the recording cued, her voice admitting the forgery and her plan to sell the cottage. She looked at me as I stirred the coffee. "I told you, Harold, don't touch that. You always make it too strong." "Then I'll just make yours light," I said, smiling. I added 1 small spoon of the glucose powder into her cup. It melted instantly, clear as water. Nothing dangerous, nothing illegal, but just enough to raise her sugar, make her flush, sweat, and panic a little. Enough to make her lose control at the exact wrong moment. By 9:30, the guests began to arrive. First came the Langleys, then Mrs. Turner from next door, and finally my daughter, Sophie. Elaine greeted everyone with her bright, fake smile. "Welcome, welcome. Please, sit down. Harold's been dying to show off the coffee." Everyone laughed, and she looked at me like she'd already won. As they chatted, I watched her drink. 1 sip, then another. She kept talking, bragging, as usual, about the cottage, the smart investments, and how she had finally convinced Harold to move on. Sophie frowned slightly. "Mom, that's not what Dad told me." Elaine's smile froze. "He's just confused, dear. You know how age plays tricks on people." The words hit me, but I stayed calm. 10 minutes later, a light sheen of sweat appeared on her forehead. She dabbed it with a napkin. "Must be warm in here," she said. Mrs. Turner shook her head. "It's actually quite cool, dear." Then her hand started to tremble. I need some air," she said, standing up. Sophie looked worried. "Mom, are you okay?" Elaine tried to speak, but her words came out uneven. "Something's wrong." "Harold, what did you—" That's when I pressed play on my phone. Her own voice filled the room, loud and clear. "Yeah, I'll sign the deed myself. He won't notice. The old man shakes too much to read fine print anyway." The guests froze. Mrs. Turner's eyes went wide. The Langleys stopped eating. Elaine turned pale. How did you—" I placed my phone on the table. "That's you, Elaine. Your voice. The smart home camera recorded it." Sophie stood up slowly. "Mom, tell me that isn't real." Elaine's breathing quickened. "He's lying. He's setting me up." "No," I said quietly. "I'm showing you what honesty looks like." She sank back into her chair, face red and shiny with sweat. For once, she had no words. The room went completely silent. Even the coffee pot stopped bubbling. Sophie looked at me with tears in her eyes, not out of pity, but pride. "Dad," she whispered, "what did you do?" "Nothing illegal," I said. "Just the truth." Stirred a little differently. Elaine stared at me, shaking. "You poisoned me." I shook my head. "No, Elaine. You poisoned yourself years ago. I just gave you the mirror." And in that moment, every guest in the room saw her for what she truly was. For a few seconds, no one moved. Only the faint hum of the ceiling fan filled the room. Elaine's breath came short and fast, her eyes darting from face to face as if looking for an escape. I didn't speak. I just let the silence do the talking. Mrs. Turner broke it first. "Elaine, is that really your voice?" Elaine laughed, a dry, nervous sound. "He edited it. You all know how confused he is. He's been sick." Sophie stepped forward. "Mom, stop." "That was you. I've heard that tone my whole life." Elaine turned toward her, desperate. "Sweetheart, he's trying to ruin me. You know how he gets when he's jealous." I quietly picked up the flash drive from my coat pocket and placed it on the table. This contains the full recording from the kitchen camera. Dated, time-stamped, untouched. "You can watch it any time." She froze. Her hand trembled, the coffee cup rattling against the saucer. You were spying on me?" "I was protecting what's mine," I said calmly. "You were the one signing my name on forged papers." The color drained from her face. The glucose had done its small job. Nothing more than a flush, a little lightheadedness, but it added weight to the moment. The guests watched her, realizing she wasn't the victim here. I turned toward the others. Elaine was selling my mother's cottage. She told people I agreed, but she forged my signature. Every step was recorded, every document backed up. The Langleys stood slowly. We should go," Mrs. Langley whispered to her husband. "No," Elaine said sharply. "Don't you leave! You don't understand." Her chair scraped the floor as she stood, swaying slightly. She pointed at me. "You think you're clever, don't you? You think a few little tricks make you a hero?" I didn't answer. Instead, I pulled an envelope from my pocket and slid it across the table. Inside were the original deed papers, real signatures, notarized. "This is the truth," I said. "And that," I nodded toward the phone, still playing her voice, "is what you became." For a moment, she just stared, chest heaving. Then she reached for her bag. "I'm calling the police," she said. "Good," I replied softly. I already did. Right on cue, a firm knock sounded at the door. 2 uniformed officers stepped inside. One of them, Officer Daniels, nodded to me. "Mr. Whitman?" "Yes." "Got your call about possible property fraud." Elaine's eyes went wide. "He's lying. He drugged me. Look at me." Daniels raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, are you saying you were poisoned?" "Yes," she snapped. "He put something in my coffee." I handed over the small brown jar labeled Glucose Tolerance Test Sample. "You can test it," I said. "It's harmless. Medical sugar powder. The reaction you're seeing is the same one nurses use to check blood sugar levels." The officer glanced at the label, then at Elaine's flushed face. "Ma'am, we can have a medic check you, but this isn't poison." Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked at me like she didn't recognize who I was anymore. "Mrs. Whitman," the other officer said gently, "we also have a call from your realtor confirming you signed sale documents without your husband's consent. We'll need to take a statement." Elaine sank into her chair. "This is a nightmare," she whispered. Sophie moved beside me, her voice shaking but firm. "Mom, you did this." The officers asked a few more questions, then escorted Elaine to another room to talk privately. I stayed seated, hands flat on the table, breathing slowly. The guests whispered their goodbyes and slipped out one by one. When the door finally closed behind the last of them, the house felt larger, almost echoing. Sophie sat across from me. "Dad," she said quietly, "did you plan all of this?" I nodded. "Every second. Even the powder?" "It's just sugar," I said. I needed her to sweat a little, so everyone could see the truth. She gave a small, shaky laugh. "You always said honesty has a taste." "Sweet, if you earn it," I said. A few minutes later, the officers returned. "We're not arresting anyone tonight," Daniels said. "But we'll file the fraud report and freeze any property transfers until it's sorted." "That's all I wanted," I said. They left quietly. Elaine came back into the kitchen, pale and shaking, holding her purse like a shield. "You've humiliated me," she said. "No," I said softly. "You did that yourself. I just let the truth speak." She tried to glare at me. but her eyes dropped to the table, the coffee stain spreading under her cup like a dark flower. When she finally walked out the door, the room felt lighter, like someone had opened a window after years of smoke. Sophie placed her hand over mine. "Are you okay?" I looked around the kitchen, the camera light blinking red, the sunlight catching the rim of the coffee pot. For the first time in a long while, I said, "Yes," she smiled faintly. "What will you do now?" "Clean up," I said. "Then start fresh." As she left, I turned off the camera and unplugged it. The recording had done its job. The house was quiet again except for the ticking clock. I poured myself a small cup of coffee, black, no sugar, and took a slow sip. The taste was bitter, but peaceful. Elaine thought she could control me with shame. She never understood that the calmest people hold the sharpest truths. Tomorrow, the papers would reach the court, and the world would know what really happened here. For tonight, I just sat there, watching the steam rise from my cup, whispering to myself, "That's what justice smells like." By Monday morning, the story had already started to spread around Savannah. In quiet neighborhoods like ours, word travels fast, especially when police cars are seen parked outside during brunch. I spent most of that morning in my lawyer's office, sipping bitter coffee while she reviewed the evidence. Ms. Green was sharp, mid-40s, and didn't waste time on sympathy. "You have everything documented?" she asked. I handed her the flash drive and the deed copies. "Recordings, voice, dates, all there." She plugged it in, listened to 30 seconds, and nodded. "That's all we need. She'll have to face fraud charges." When I came home, the house was quiet. Elaine's clothes were gone from the closet. Her perfume still hung in the air, faint, like something that once filled the room but didn't belong there anymore. On the kitchen counter, I found a note. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even an excuse. Just one short line in her perfect handwriting. "You'll regret embarrassing me." I smiled, folded it once, and dropped it into the trash. That afternoon, Sophie stopped by. She'd already heard from the neighbors, half of them curious, the other half pretending not to be. "Dad," she said softly, "Mom's at Aunt Rita's. She's angry, but she's scared too." "Good," I said. "Fear teaches where love fails," Sophie frowned. "You don't sound happy about winning." I looked at her for a long moment. This wasn't about winning. It was about ending. A few days later, my lawyer called. The county had frozen the property transfer. The real estate agent had provided every email and message from Elaine. There was no way she could undo it. The cottage was legally safe, back under my sole name. That evening, I drove down to Tybee Island. It was early spring. The air smelled of salt and rain, the way it did when my mother was still alive. The cottage looked exactly the same. Yellow shutters, white fence, wild daisies growing by the porch steps. Inside, the floors creaked like they remembered me. I opened the windows, let the sea wind in, and sat by the old piano. On top of it, there was still a faded photo of me and Mom from 1988, the year I bought her this house. For the first time in years, I felt peace. A week later, Elaine's lawyer called mine. She wanted to settle privately. I refused, not out of revenge, but out of principle. What she did wasn't just betrayal, it was theft covered in laughter, and people like her needed to face the kind of truth that leaves marks on paper. A month later, the court ruling came through. The judge ordered the sale canceled, the property secured in my name, and the forged signature reported for legal review. Elaine avoided jail but paid heavy fines. The humiliation, I knew, would sting worse than any sentence. When it was all over, I went back to the cottage with Sophie. We sat on the porch watching the sun sink behind the ocean. She asked quietly, "Do you ever miss her?" I thought for a while. "No," I said. "I miss who I thought she was." The breeze carried the smell of coffee from inside. I smiled faintly. "You know," I said, I still can't drink it sweet anymore. Sophie laughed softly. Guess you've had enough sugar for a lifetime. Maybe, I said. But I learned something. What's that? Never mistake kindness for weakness. People forget that silence isn't surrender. It's preparation. As the sun went down, I took one last look at the ocean and whispered to myself, "You didn't lose me, Elaine. You just taught me how to stop losing myself." 2 months later, we stood in court. The room smelled faintly of old wood and coffee, a place where people came to tell the truth, whether they liked it or not. Elaine sat across from me at the defense table, dressed in a dark suit, her hair tied tightly back. She looked smaller somehow, like a shadow of the woman who once ran our house. She didn't meet my eyes. The judge, an older man with silver glasses, adjusted his papers. Case number 2415, property fraud, forgery, and false representation. His voice was calm but heavy. We'll review the evidence now. My lawyer, Ms. Green, stood up. Your Honor, Exhibit A, a smart home recording clearly capturing the defendant admitting to falsifying property documents. She clicked play on the small speaker. Elaine's voice filled the courtroom. Yeah, I'll sign it myself. He won't notice. The old man shakes too much to read fine print anyway. There was no sound for a full 5 seconds after. Just silence. Then the judge said, "That is very clear, Mrs. Whitman." Elaine shifted in her seat, eyes wet but jaw tight. "It was a joke," she whispered. The judge shook his head. "Jokes don't come with signed documents and real estate contracts." Ms. Green continued. "We also have financial records, property listings, and verified copies of Mr. Whitman's authentic signature." She handed them over neatly. The defense lawyer tried to argue. My client was under stress. She believed she had her husband's consent. The judge looked directly at her. "Do you have any written proof of that consent?" He didn't. Elaine's hands were trembling now. She stared down at the table, her lipstick smudged, her eyes darting toward the courtroom doors like she was searching for a way out. When it was my turn to speak, I stood slowly, gripping the edge of the podium. "Your Honor," I said, "I don't want revenge. I only want what's mine, my mother's home, my peace, and my name kept clean." The judge nodded thoughtfully. "Understood." He leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Whitman, you've handled this with restraint. That matters in this court." Then he turned to Elaine. "Mrs. Whitman, the court finds that you intentionally forged your husband's signature and attempted to sell jointly owned property without consent. The transaction is nullified. The property returns to Mr. Whitman's name in full. You are ordered to pay legal costs and a $50,000 fine." Elaine gasped. "50,000?" The judge's tone stayed calm. "And you're fortunate not to face criminal sentencing." The gavel came down with a sharp thud. Case closed. Elaine stood there, frozen. For a moment, I thought she might say something. An apology, a scream, anything. But she only gathered her purse, gave me one last look full of hate and disbelief, and walked out. I didn't follow. Outside the courthouse, the sun was bright. Ms. Green shook my hand. "You did the right thing, Mr. Whitman," she said. "Most people would have gone for blood." I smiled faintly. I just wanted truth on record. Sophie met me on the steps. She hugged me tight. "It's over," she whispered. "Yes," I said quietly. "And peace feels strange after so much noise." We stood there for a moment, watching cars pass and people rush by, all of them living their own quiet battles. That night, I went back to the cottage again. I lit one small candle by the window and brewed a single cup of black coffee. No sugar, no bitterness left in my heart. The ocean waves outside sounded like breathing, calm, steady, alive. Justice doesn't always come loud or fast. Sometimes it arrives like a steady tide, washing away everything false until only truth remains. I took a sip, set the cup down, and whispered into the quiet, Justice isn't revenge. It's peace with proof. Weeks passed quietly after the court case. The noise, the tension, the constant watchfulness. All of it slowly faded like a bad storm finally moving out to sea. I spent most of my mornings at the Tybee Island cottage. The place felt different now. Not because it had changed, but because I had. I'd open the windows wide, let the ocean wind roll through, and just sit there with a cup of coffee, listening to the waves. It was peaceful in a way I hadn't felt in years. Sometimes I'd catch myself reaching for another cup. Muscle memory from all those mornings with Elaine. Then I'd laugh softly. The kitchen had gone silent, but it wasn't empty. It was free. Sophie came by every few days. She brought groceries, fresh flowers, and updates about the neighbors. Mom moved to Florida, she said one afternoon. Aunt Rita helped her find a small apartment near Clearwater. I nodded. That's good. She's been quiet online, too. No posts, no updates. That's even better, I said. Sophie smiled sadly. Do you ever think about forgiving her? I thought for a long moment. Forgiveness isn't a gift you give someone who's sorry, I said. It's something you do when you're ready to stop carrying their weight. She nodded, eyes soft. So, are you ready? Almost, I said. Not yet, but soon. I wasn't bitter anymore. Just tired in a calm, clean way. The kind of tired that means you've already walked through the fire and you're standing on the other side. That night, I found an old envelope tucked between the piano books. It was my mother's handwriting. The paper had yellowed, but her words were still clear. If anyone tries to take what's yours, don't fight with anger, Harold. Fight with truth. Anger burns out. Truth lasts. I sat there, holding that note for a long time. She'd written it decades ago, but somehow it felt like she knew this moment would come. The next morning, I took the letter and framed it on the kitchen wall, right above the coffee maker. Not as a reminder of pain, but as proof that my story didn't end with betrayal. It ended with peace. When the sun set that evening, the sky turned gold over the water. I brewed one last cup for the day, black and simple, the way I liked it now. As the steam rose, I said out loud, people think revenge is about getting even, but it's not. It's about remembering who you are before they tried to break you. I smiled. Elaine had taught me something she never meant to, that control isn't in power, or money, or ownership. It's in knowing you can walk away and still have yourself intact. Sophie joined me on the porch later. She looked out at the sea and said, "You seem lighter, Dad." "I am," I said. The truth finally feels quiet enough to live with. We sat in silence for a while, the ocean wind moving softly through the porch curtains. When the stars came out, I whispered, "You didn't lose me, Elaine. You just taught me to stand without you." And with that, the story that began with bitterness ended in something far greater. Peace. Life after justice feels strange. You expect fireworks, celebration, maybe even relief that lasts for days. But instead, it's quiet. Like the world exhales, and you finally hear yourself think again. I sold the house in Savannah a month after the court case. Too many ghosts there. The kitchen where I overheard her call, the dining room where she laughed at me, the stairs that still creaked in her rhythm. I didn't want to rebuild a life in the same walls where trust died. I moved full-time to the cottage on Tybee Island. The place wasn't large, but it was mine. Every board, every picture, every cup. It all felt earned again. I spent my mornings walking the beach, feeding seagulls, and making black coffee in silence. No mockery, no arguments, no lies. Just the sound of the tide rolling in and out. Sophie visited often, sometimes staying the weekend. She'd help me repaint the porch or reorganize the garden her grandmother had once planted. She said, "Dad, you finally look like yourself again." Maybe she was right. My hands still shook sometimes, but now it didn't bother me. The shaking didn't mean weakness anymore. It meant I'd held on through everything and still stood steady enough to hold my cup. One evening, I got a letter from Elaine's lawyer. It wasn't a threat this time. Just a short note saying she'd paid the fines in full and filed for bankruptcy. She'd also included a typed letter of apology. No handwriting, no emotion. Just printed words that said, "I was wrong. You didn't deserve what I did. I hope you can forgive me someday." I read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer. Not to keep for her, but to remind myself that even the coldest hearts can feel regret when the truth burns hot enough. The neighbors around the island began to wave when I passed by. A few even came over with pies or flowers, saying things like, "Heard about what happened. Good for you for standing your ground." I always smiled politely. I didn't need pity. I just wanted normal again. At night, I'd sit on the porch, looking out at the waves. The sky over Tybee has a way of forgiving. It changes color without apology. Every evening is different, but the rhythm stays the same. That's what I loved about it. I started keeping a small journal again. Nothing fancy, just notes about the day. Little truths, simple lines. One entry read, April 16th, made coffee, read an old letter, watched the sea. The world didn't end. It healed. Sometimes Sophie would sit beside me, scrolling on her phone. "You ever think you'll marry again?" she asked one night, half joking. I laughed softly. "No, sweetheart. I think I've had my share of love lessons." She smiled. "Then at least promise me you'll keep telling your stories." "I'll try," I said, "but only the ones worth telling." We sat in silence for a while, and the world felt still. Not empty, just calm. As the moon rose over the water, I whispered to myself, "Peace doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without pain." And that's what I had now. A quiet life, a clean truth, and a freedom no one could take again. It's funny how life circles back in ways you don't expect. Months later, I got a call from the same real estate agent who had once been part of Elaine's plan. "Mr. Whitman," she said, her voice careful, "I wanted to let you know the buyers who were interested in your cottage back then just made an offer again, this time through legal channels." I smiled, even though she couldn't see it. "That house isn't for sale," I said. "It never was." "It's not about the money. It's about memory." She paused. "I understand, sir. You sound happier." "I am," I said, "because I finally learned what my mother meant when she said, 'Peace is the most expensive thing you'll ever own.'" After hanging up, I stood by the window, watching the ocean move under the late afternoon sun. The same sunlight that used to shine on my mother's hair when she sat on that porch years ago. The same sunlight that once reflected off Elaine's wine glass when she mocked me. Everything changes, but the light stays honest. I walked out onto the sand, letting the tide wash over my shoes. The air smelled of salt and thyme, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel old. I just felt free. The irony of it all hit me then. Elaine spent years chasing control over money, property, image. She thought power came from owning things, but in the end, the only thing she lost completely was herself and me. I'd lost a marriage, but gained something worth far more: clarity. In quiet moments, I still think about her face that morning at the brunch. The moment she realized I wasn't the fool she thought I was. There was fear there, yes, but also recognition. The kind that comes when truth finally looks you in the eye. I didn't destroy her. I didn't need to. I just let the truth stand tall and do the work on its own. A few weeks ago, Sophie brought her kids to visit. My granddaughter ran around the porch, laughing, her tiny feet tapping the same floorboards my mother once cleaned by hand. She pointed at the frame on the wall, the letter from my mother, and asked, "Who wrote that, Grandpa?" I knelt down and said, "Someone who taught me the difference between love and control." She didn't understand yet, but one day she will. That night, after everyone went to sleep, I sat outside again with my coffee. The sky was full of stars. The sound of the ocean mixed with the creak of the old rocking chair. I thought about everything that had happened. The betrayal, the humiliation, the long path to peace. And I realized something. Elaine was right about one thing. I did shake too much to sign the papers, but not because I was weak. It was because I still cared back then. Now my hands were steady, not from medicine, not from strength, but from truth. I smiled and whispered into the wind. "You thought you could break me with bitterness, but you only proved how strong peace can be." Then I took a final sip of coffee, set the cup down beside me, and watched the horizon turn silver as dawn began to rise. Some people chase revenge, others chase justice. I just learned how to sit still until the truth showed up. And that, I've learned, is the sweetest revenge of all.